as usual. It's very, very good to see you all here. Again, you could be out on a golf course somewhere or doing something else, but you've decided to join us to look at the big questions of life and see where the evidence leads. And my name is Greg Schrock. For those of you who haven't been here before, Dr. Stu Orr, he started this club 3 years ago, and I got involved last year. And I just want to make sure everyone knows he's got the knowledge and the experience to answer these questions authoritatively. He really does. I have learned so much from him, and it's a real privilege to be able to interact with Stu and to communicate with him about these important issues. So this is great. If you haven't been here before, I just want to briefly explain the mission of Socrates at Saddlebrooke. And this is right on the website. It is to explore and discuss big questions of life regarding origins and destiny. Where did I come from? Where am I going? Why am I here? We examine evidence from science, philosophy, theology, history, the humanities, and psychology, and we follow the path of inquiry no matter where it leads. And that's a common theme across many, many of the discussions that we've had and the presentations. We want to present evidence and invite everybody to just follow the evidence no matter where it leads. So, where have we been this season? This is the third season, and this is the third session of the third season. I'll briefly explain where we've been so far. In October, we discussed the beginning of the universe and how that points to an intelligence or a creator. There is irrefutable evidence that the universe began to exist. And because the universe is all energy, time, matter, everything that we know of, something outside of energy, time, matter, space had to have been some kind of a creative agent. And so we think that the beginning of the universe points to a creator. Session 2, we talked about how the universe is fine-tuned for life, and not just the universe, but the earth itself. And we discussed how a creator is the best explanation for that. It couldn't have happened by chance. It's just so infinitesimally impossible for that to happen. And it couldn't have been natural law because natural law didn't exist prior to the universe. So we made a case that the creator is the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe and the earth. Okay. How many of you were there at the beginning of the universe? Anybody? No. Okay. I know Saddlebrooke only lets older people in, so I'm just checking. We're gonna bring this down to a more personal level. How many people are alive? Yeah, okay. We're talking about life. And what does life say about a creator? Does the evidence point to a creator, or does it point to some natural cause that we're all from? Now, I think there's another slide here that kind of goes over a little bit of what we're talking about life. Really, we can talk about two different realms. One is Darwinism, evolution. Once life is in existence, how did we get here? Now, I encourage you to come back in February because that is going to be the topic of our discussion in February. Today, however, we're going to back up from that, and we're actually going to talk about the origin of life itself. How did it come to be? How is it that a lifeless universe or a lifeless earth somehow gave rise to life? What about the information? How did information come into the universe? These are the discussions that we're going to be having today. So, and I hope that's a little bit more personal than the beginning of the universe and this kind of thing. We're all alive. We all have trillions of cells inside of our bodies, and we're going to be talking about that and where the evidence leads for that.
Just think about it for a second. Here's the primordial soup. You've probably heard this theory, right? The Earth 4 billion years ago was bombarded with asteroids, and it was hot, and it starts cooling down. And then there's volcanoes, like you see in this first picture here, and it forms little warm ponds, and lightning comes down, and chemicals come together, and they somehow come together. But think about it. How does a piece of mud turn into something animated? I mean, when you walked in, you saw this little single cell creature that's 1/10 of a millimeter. Can you imagine? And that thing acts like it has purpose and design. I mean, it's designed for, it wants to stay alive. wants to stay, at least it knows that, right?
Absolutely.
And it knows it needs food, so it's searching for bacteria. How does it know that? How does it digest what it finds into turning it into power so it can wiggle around? And then when it starts losing its juices inside there, you probably didn't notice it, but it started losing its juices, then it dies because it's not in equilibrium with the outside. It is in equilibrium, it just dies. So this is what we're going to be discussing today. How did this come about? Now the technical term in science is called abiogenesis. And you can imagine biogenesis means that life was created somehow. That was the theory before Darwin. Everybody believed that, all the way back to Plato. Abiogenesis, A means not. So abiogenesis is this first thing that takes us from primordial soup, mud pie, to molecules that are hydrogen and carbon dioxide and nitrogen. Somehow they get together in this soup, lightning strikes somehow, and it forms a cell. Now, that little creature up there called a cell is what Darwin knew about. That's all he knew. A little section of protoplasm. But it wasn't just Darwin. Everybody thought that in science. They had no idea what was inside the cell.
So then it was a simple thing, right?
Just a simple thing.
Simple blob of jello.
Blob of jelly. And he just presupposed that if you had enough of these blobs, somehow they get animated over time. Well, the last 70 years have been amazing. We're going to peek inside the cell and see what's really in there. And it doesn't look anything like that.
That's a really good segue to my first question.
Oh,
I think you're getting in on this already. When I was a kid, I watched the show Cosmos. Has anybody ever seen that with Carl Sagan? I don't remember which episode it was, but there was one episode where Dr. Sagan was standing inside of a laboratory with all these beakers and flasks and all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. And he said that those scientists had recreated the early Earth in these flasks and shot some electricity through it. And he said, well, look at how easy it was to create the stuff of life. So I put it to you, has science discovered how to create life?
How many of you have seen that picture on the left there in your biology textbook or on a PBS station? Have you ever seen that picture before? That's called the Miller-Urey experiment of 1952. And for 70 years ago, we thought, aha, we've created life chemicals in the laboratory. In fact, most of the population believes that life has been created in the lab somehow, or at least part of life,
yeah.
Or we're right at the verge of life. There could be nothing further from the truth, and we're going to get into that. But that's the theory, and 70 years ago, and for 70 years, we've made almost zero progress on this. Now, some of you that have followed this say, well, I know they've made progress, I've read about it. Yes, what you've read about are amino acids. Amino acids are to a living creature like a brick that's to the Empire State Building. Basically, we're going to...
A building block of life.
Just,
not life itself, but a building block of life.
It's just a building block of a building block of a building block. It's
okay.
More at that level. So in the laboratory, what we still have are dead chemicals. Dead chemicals that somehow have to get together and be alive, right? So, no mechanism. Oh, but we know Darwin had a theory for mechanism. No, he didn't have a theory about this. In fact, his theory starts with first life. As soon as there's life, then his theory is how life became various species. Went from simple life, it became us. It's called the molecules. But he didn't come up with what first life was. So abiogenesis, his theory doesn't help at all with this. And at the time, back 70 years ago, we thought that the Earth's atmosphere contained certain chemicals without oxygen, for example. If you have oxygen, you can't have life-giving chemicals because it just oxidizes them and they disappear. If you have too much water, it disappears too. So there's really, early Earth today, we know, is hostile really to this kind of chemical beginning. Plus there's no primordial soup. We've been looking for it for 70 years and there isn't any, all right? So that's all the negative evidence. We're going to talk about positive evidence as we go for some other theory. But the 70 years of experimentation has not been helpful here. The 70 years of theory hasn't produced much either, because we need a theory. Evolution says you go from simple to complex. So if here's where we are, and this is before, and this is after, so what's the simpler thing of where we are now? Well, it's something simpler than a cell. Well, what's simpler than a cell? Proteins, components, DNA. You've all heard of DNA. That's you've heard RNA is kind of like a derivative. Anyway, those three are elements that are before a cell. So obviously there must be a theory of how we had a simpler thing turn into a cell. Dead end.
Nothing exists.
Dead end. We talk about RNA being the most likely theory, and that's a dead end too. So.
I saw this picture in one of your presentations last year. It looks like an artist rendering of something. What is this? Can you explain briefly what this picture is?
Well, look
it's beautiful.
Look at the right-hand corner again first, Greg. That's what we thought it was. That's what we thought the cell was. What you're looking at here, this is not an artist rendering. This is not even a graphic. This is not even a simulation. This is a living cell, a photograph.
This is a photograph.
A living cell. And all those things aren't just colors. This isn't just an artistic expression of nature. Those are pieces of the living cell. We know what each one of them does. Some of them are power supplies, some of them are chemical plants, manufacturing plants, some of them are waste disposal facilities. All the things that we associate with life, that's what does it. That's the plant, the power plant that's inside the cell. And you know this cell? We have 100 trillion of those in our bodies. That they're like a millionth of a millimeter. Can you imagine? In size, all that stuff is in there. So the cell, and the theories of the cell was, well, like you said, was it just came together by chance? Come on. Even the most staunch materialists would say, no, that's impossible.
It does look like a little city, that is for sure. Right?
Oh, it's really neat. We're going to look
every one of those things has got a job to do within each of your trillions of cells.
That's a very good block. That one cell is like 10 square miles of chemical facilities, if you would believe that. But here's the real rub. If you ask my friend, I call him my friend Richard Dawkins because he's the leader of the movement, the materialistic movement on the other side. He said, well, life just began with the first self-replicating molecule. That would be like asking Elon Musk how he became a billionaire. He said, well, it first started with my first self-replicating dollar. I put it in my pot.
Not what happened? Not a very satisfying explanation.
We need a mechanism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we need a science.
Right.
That's not even a scientific answer.
Yeah.
So, and it's also, that cell is, what we're going to find out, is irreducibly complex. You remove any one of these things, it dies.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And we need to replace them like at a million per minute.
Now, Dr. Sagan was talking about building blocks when he was talking, right?
Yes.
What are the building blocks of life? Don't you really only need building blocks? Is that all you need to be able to construct one of those things?
Well, just imagine you had one brick.
Okay.
That's what we have. We have some amino acids, and we even thought that was really putting us on the path of generating life. But amino acids we found in meteorites, even from outer space. As far as I know, there's no outer space, no life on any meteors that are out there.
That we know of. Yep.
But you can imagine. Look at all this stuff that's inside the cell. There, we have manufacturing facilities, transportation systems. They all have bricks or some kind of building blocks in them. But that doesn't explain how we got all that, right? And especially when you get to the control room there, the DNA, which is, we have 100 trillion, I put billion there, 100 trillion cells in our body, and they operate at 100 billion operations per second. It's just absolutely mind-boggling that we have facilities with transportation. Well, I've gotten into all this, and if you're interested, you really should go to the web. On the website, I have detailed explanations of what this is at a lay level, and it's just absolutely fascinating. You probably have heard this explained as an evolution creation war or debate or something, and it becomes a religious argument. When you hear these kind of explanations or discussions in any lecture series, it usually gets down to, well, that's a faith belief versus a science belief. We do science against science. We do evidence-based information here. I mean, if you're a person of faith, that's great. Then you would see the creator as God, right? If you're not a religious person, you would say, I don't know, but there's some intelligence behind the universe. And if you don't believe there's an intelligence, you're saying, I don't know, and I don't care, or I don't know, I'm going to find out someday because I'm headed for something. I'm headed for somewhere, right? But I wanted to bring out that even open-minded but hardcore atheists have looked at this like we have looked at it and said, this is just so mind-boggling. There has to be an intelligence out there somewhere doing something. Fred Weil comes to mind. He did the calculation that said, there's no way, Jose, of chance coming to get up. Head of the Observatory of Astronomical Physics at Cambridge University. No friend of religion at all. No chance. Francis Crick in the middle there, he's the one co-discoverer of DNA. He came to the conclusion, and he was very hardcore in his atheism and said, there's almost a miracle. He said, you can't possibly get there from here. Almost a miracle. And Anthony Flew, when I was getting my theology degree, Anthony Flew was like the supreme commander of atheism from a philosophical standpoint. And he, in his later years, just said it has to be, in fact, he even went as far as saying there has to be a God. He became a theist. He didn't become a Christian, but he became a theist. So,
and I think it was the fine-tuning argument that actually made the difference in it. That's what I heard.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The two arguments that we heard the last two times, even more so than the biology, the fact that there had to be a beginning to the universe, and the fact that planet Earth is so highly fine-tuned, you said, I give up. There has to be a brain, there has to be a mind out there that starts this whole thing off, not just material.
I recognize that from the Vatican. Scientific evidence points to ID biogenesis, not abiogenesis. That's a good segue into this next question, because I'm actually, I've seen on your website that you have actually said that the origin of life is one of the greatest examples of the academy saying one thing, but the mountain of evidence pointing in the opposite direction. I was intrigued when you said that on the website. Can you expound on that?
Well, when we hear questions or reports about building blocks and how we've done this stuff in the laboratory and so forth, I want to put this in perspective. I mean, imagine that skyscraper there. We've built amino acid chains in the laboratory. That's like a building block. So imagine building that skyscraper by having a pile of those bricks. Now you need some energy. All right, I'll give it energy, right? I'll put a stick of dynamite under there. Then light. Are we going to get that building? Does anybody believe?
Very likely not.
Anybody believes that, that we're going to get that building? No, there has to be some intelligence behind it. How do you put a building together? You put it together, first of all, it has to have a purpose. I mean, what kind of building are we building? Build a country club? Are we building a brothel? I don't know. We got to have some kind of purpose to this thing. And it has to have not only a goal and a purpose, it has to have plans, blueprint. I mean, can you imagine doing something without some kind of mind that puts together blueprints? And then you have to have know-how, the know-how to use those blueprints from a manufacturer, and the ability to do it. Yes, we can get that building. as long as we have all those things as part of the intelligent design.
So there's the answer to the question I posed earlier when Dr. Sagan said all you need is the building blocks of life. You actually don't. You need a whole lot more than just the building blocks. You need information. You need what's the purpose of this structure and how are we going to construct it and then how is it going to get constructed? All of these things.
Exactly. Yep.
And so are you saying that the academy itself is ignoring this evidence, or?
I'm going to explain this from a philosophical standpoint, because how do you when you get into what people believe, now we're talking worldview, right? We're not just talking about, because there's evidence and then there's the interpretation of the evidence. When you look at evidence, how do you go to interpret? If you look at the evidence from a particular point of view, then you're going to cherry pick the evidence that supports you, and you're going to negate the evidence that doesn't support you. In fact, you'll leave that kind of evidence off the table.
And we're all prone to doing that. That's a human thing to do.
I do.
Confirmation bias, I think, is what it's called.
Confirmation
You're right.
bias.
It's to be human is to try to ignore the evidence that doesn't confirm our worldview. But what you're saying is the academy is doing that because the evidence is really pointing towards some kind of an intelligence.
Well, that's why I love Socrates, because we want to be open to the evidence. Which way and ask the audience, which way do you think it points? Does it point this way, or does it point that way? Here's what the scientific evidence reveals. And it reveals this intelligence behind it. Why? Because the cell is irreducibly complex. It has zero probability of being of self-assembly. So when you hear about self-assembly type of theories and so forth, that's just wishful thinking. It's fine for somebody to have a theory or a hypothesis, but to be scientific, you have to have evidence that supports it. Materialism is how science works today. And we'll get into explaining that. Materialism means that what Carl Sagan said, the universe is all there is, all there ever was, all there ever will be. Materialism means material. If materials is all there is, then there's no place for something immaterial. But if there has to be something transcendent like information, design, purpose, that's beyond material, right? So if you're going to be a scientist in a materialist sense, you don't allow that evidence to take. If you don't allow it, you can never accumulate it. So that's the reason I love Socrates. We can do it right here. We tell the other, and we investigate the other side of the story.
Yes.
The public only hears one side of the story. And what the other side of the story is, life requires something more. And that something more has to be transcendent. Because if it wasn't transcendent, as we talked about the first time, it would dissipate. It would be subject to the second law of thermodynamics and die. There has to be something eternal, something that's intelligent, something that has meaning and purpose. So information, and then something has to animate that mud to make it work.
Good. So we've been talking about evidence, and you've given a good amount of it now. Let's talk about specifics, because actually there's two parts of evidence, pieces of evidence that are very profound and that you have brought up. Again, go to the website to get more information. But when we look at the origin of life, there's two issues. One is information.
Yes.
We don't want to lose that. And then the other is engineering. We talked a little bit about the engineering. We'll get into that a little bit more. But I want to start really at the beginning. Let's talk about the information. You said that information is positive evidence for an intelligence or for a creator. Mm-hmm. Can you expound on that a little bit? What do you mean by information in the cell? I mean, I saw a lot of structures. What do you mean by information?
Think about information for a second. Isn't that a very difficult thing to explain? What is information? Well, at its basic level, information is you know something after you've gotten it that you didn't know before, right? You might not be able to precisely explain what that something is, but you sure know it when you see it. Like when Supreme Court Justice was treating a case on pornography, and somebody wanted him to define what he meant by pornography, and he said, I can't define it, but I sure know what it is when I see it. Well, information is kind of like that, but it is more specific too. Information is something you didn't know before. And what we find in the cell, and why we're so conclusive about our opinion about the cell having transcendent information, is because it has a blueprint in it. It has our blueprint. Every cell in your body has the DNA information in it that makes you unique. And your cells are dying at something like a couple million every few minutes. And it's a good thing that they're replaced, isn't it? Can you imagine when you say, I'm losing my head, you really are losing your head. In fact, you're losing skin cells at a rate of like a couple thousand an hour. Greg, I just saw a couple drop on the floor there.
The cleanup crew will have to get that, sorry.
And all of you are losing your skin cells too. So your neighbor is good. You don't have to worry about it though, because there's enough dust mites on the floor that are going to eat them. So. But that information is there. Can you imagine your cells are being replaced, and they do it perfectly, almost perfectly. Yes, sure, there's misses occasionally and so forth, but you think about the billions of transformations in an hour. So that blueprint information is in the DNA. That's one set of information. Then there's a code. Can you imagine a code? Remember, you've heard of the Enigma machine in World War II that the Germans had, right? Breaking that code was incredible. That was intelligence that broke that code. That code is inside your cell, called the genetic code. And that genetic code is in every living thing. You don't have codes come together by material processes. Energy, materialism just says that matter is all there is. Matter and energy is all there is, and they transfer back and forth. Molecules in motion, as you might have heard before. And that doesn't create information. That would be like taking your Scrabble box when you're playing and throwing it out on the floor and expecting it to put Hamlet together. You might get 2, you might even get BE. I don't care how many billions of years or trillions of years you have, you're never going to get 2B or not 2B, and you're never going to get to Hamlet out of it. Where does it come from? It has to come from the outside somewhere. It has to come from somewhere else. So now the genetic code. Now you have the DNA, the genetic code, to the assembly instructions in the ribosome, which strings together these amino acids, long strings of amino acids. And then those amino acids get to a certain point and says, aha, I know what protein that is. And it goes and wraps itself up into a full 3-dimensional protein. Like that. Incredible thing. I mean, that protein is just incredible. And it has, that's construction information. There's information. So there's 4 levels of information right here that is not the product of materialism. And without that information, there's no life.
Yeah, there's layers, because the DNA, which is in every cell, strands and strands of it, millions of these things, every strand of DNA has got a 4-letter code, right? Alphabet. But it's not random. All those things mean something, and then it's interpreted by this, the genetic code, which you need in order to make sense of the information.
That's exactly right.
And then once it has the information, reads the genetic code, then it actually can do what it is supposed to do. And there's purpose involved with that. There's a purpose for this thing.
And it's understandable.
And it's understandable.
And we can look at this and understand it. And we can actually understand that genetic code. That's what all of our genetic engineering is and so forth, is understanding that code, the human genome. That's incredible. It's like finding a copy of Hamlet. I love Hamlet. Finding a copy of Hamlet and said, that just came together through paper and ink. Huh? No, some mind had to put that together, right? Some intelligence had to put that together.
I think in one of the videos you mentioned that forget the whole Hamlet, the first 82 characters to be or not to be, or not, that's not the first one, but to be or not to be, that is the question, and then there's another sentence after that. I think you said that the fastest computer random generator, if it was generating random letters at as fast as a computer can go, it would take longer than the age of the universe to only generate the first 82 characters in a row of Hamlet. That's amazing.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
I mean, and mathematics shows this alone, even without the biology.
It can't be
mathematics,
chance.
it can't be done.
Yeah, it
Right.
can't be chance.
Right.
Amazing.
As a matter of fact, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the information that's in this DNA molecule here. I always have to thank Gene for putting this together for me. And then I needed a mechanical engineer. You get it on the web, right? And it comes in every little piece. So I started, after 3 hours, I just gave up. I said, I know an engineer, maybe he'll do it. How many hours did you have to spend putting it together?
Oh, shoot.
About 2 hours more, but this was found in 1952, this structure, this double helix structure. And these color code here are the molecules that have the information. This is like a character set, like our alphabet, or like the 0 and 1 in computer language. This is actually a language. Red, orange, green, and blue are those 4 letters, and with that code, you can make information. You can do it with just a 0 and 1. I mean, computers just operate off of 0 and 1. And this piece of chemistry here is about 6 feet long. If I were to unwind one of my, here, I'll take it out. Yeah, I wanted, there's my DNA string here. You can see it. And on this DNA string are like beads, like a string of pearls, and it's chromosomes. And in those chromosomes, or on the genes, or that actual code, so all that information that I was showing you on that other chart is in the string. You know, this DNA thread is like a millionth of a millimeter in diameter. That just blows your mind right there.
Yeah.
And it's almost perfect. The cell dies and it looks up to, oh, I need that. Here's the recipe for that, and I put together. And he needs a skin cell right there because he just scratched that off, and voila, it comes together. So I wanted to say, now, Greg, I wanted to tell you how complex. This is the longest word, by the way, anywhere. It's 3 billion characters. The DNA string, my DNA string that I just put.
Okay.
There's 3 billion characters on there. And those 3 billion characters, I'm going to put in books. I'm going to stack those books right on this table here, all right? Okay, you can see. Now, with 3 billion characters in books like that, how high do you think the book is?
How high a stack of books would contain 3 million characters?
3 billion characters, right. 3 billion characters.
Ceiling, maybe? I don't know.
Keep going.
4-story building.
There you go. Taller than the Statue of Liberty, 350 feet.
Wow.
Just to give you an idea of how much information is packed into
A single
cell.
A single
And you have 100
DNA.
of them.
A single DNA.
A single DNA,
Right?
Yes, a single DNA, which is packed into the little nucleus in the little cell.
Unbelievable.
So that's
Lots of information.
that's just a lot of information.
So yeah, that's a convincing case that the information is specified and has a purpose, and that we only know of one way that creates information in this world, and that is intelligence. And so that's a wonderful piece of evidence.
There is
Yeah.
the other side. The other side says, oh, you can create information called Shannon information, which is static. So turn on your AM radio sometime and you'll hear static.
But that's either random or
right.
perhaps repetitive.
Exactly.
Correct? Like a pulsar or something would have something that's repetitive, but not with specified information, which means it actually is conveying some kind of a meaning, right?
That's the word, specified.
Specified information.
Like Hamlet was specified information.
Exactly.
3 billion random letters of English language is unspecified information. Is random.
Right.
Good point.
So that's very convincing. Let's turn to, we already talked a little bit about this, but we talked about the engineering in the cell. That's the other piece of evidence that you present. And you hit on this, I'm not sure how, yeah, okay, this is exactly where I was going. Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box. Fantastic book, I would highly recommend it. But in it, he does introduce the concept of irreducible complexity. I would love for you to share with us what that is.
Do we have any engineers in the audience at all? Couple of them. All right, good. Well, you guys won't have any trouble with this at all, knowing what the irreducible complexity is. That's why we need engineers, right? We put together blueprints and we assemble things. So let's engineer a mousetrap for a start. That's a pretty simple engineering task. It's only 6 pieces, right? We think it's simple until you put it together and you don't have the exact specifications for everything, right? If you don't have the right string or string strength, you don't have the right hammer, the holding bar is off by a millimeter. It doesn't hold, right? And when it's off, or if you're missing a piece, you have no mousetrap. So specified complexity means that it's specified to a point where if any part is missing or out of spec, it doesn't work.
Irreducible complexity.
Irreducible complexity. Right? So that's why we call it irreducible, because you can't reduce it any further. I mean, taking 3 parts out of a mousetrap doesn't allow you to catch half the number of mice. So, what do we find when we look inside the cell? Irreducible complexity to the umpteenth power, right? Michael Behe wrote this book because he was a trained organic biochemist, molecular biochemist, and never heard of what the Darwin's theory was. And he said, I looked one day at the flagellum, which is the little tail on a bacteria, and that little tail rotates so that bacteria can go find its food. And he said, that's an outward motor. And that's not just a piece of, that's an outward motor. And sure enough, this is what we found. When we looked inside there, we found out that there's 40 proteins that are arranged perfectly. So that we have a rotor and a stator and a propeller, and that works. And you take away any one of those proteins, it's done.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Yep.
Dies. The nice thing about organic life is that it cleans itself up. It dies and reproduces itself somehow and goes. So what we found out is the cell is engineered to irreducible complexity.
And so I suppose the takeaway from that is that when Darwin, I suppose, explains how things can come to be, it's kind of small successive steps over time, and we're going to be getting into this in February. But if there's a system or something that is irreducibly complex, that means it couldn't come from simpler forms and still have function. Is that the main point of that?
Good point. Yes, it transcended information again.
Yeah.
Coming in somehow, and that's why we attributed information to a creator of some sort. I'm not identifying the creator here. I'm just saying that something created the information. We don't know. So
got it.
I wish sometimes that our science was more open in the sense of saying, I don't know, we don't know. Are there other theories out there? Yes, there's other theories. Intelligent design is a theory. Well, then allow it to come to the table and give its evidence.
Perfect. So I think you're going to talk about equilibrium, correct?
I'm going to talk about what you saw when you came in. If you looked up on the screen, you saw that little guy. He was a tenth of a millimeter, Loxodes. He's going around trying to find his food, and he's staying alive. He has a purpose to stay alive. And how he does it is through, again, for my engineering people here, through what's called feedback control systems. And you all know what a feedback control system is, even if that language is not familiar to you. You set your thermostat at 72, 76, whatever it is. You have a goal in mind to make yourself comfortable. And you set your goal at what that is. So why are you doing that? Because you can control your environment. You have an outside shell that controls the environment. You have a heating, air conditioning system that's been engineered to be able to put on the heat when it's supposed to and put the air conditioning on when it's supposed to. I mean, it's like Brent has a mountain cabin, and he can be up there in minus 20 degree weather or 80 degree weather, but he's protected inside his mountain cabin because he has a control system, feedback control system. This is a very typical application of engineering to control our environment. And we do a lot of it, right? We control this atmosphere right here. And why do we do it? Because we don't want to be in equilibrium. We don't want to be the same as the outside. If we wanted to, we don't want to be minus 80 degrees. We want to be 72 degrees. We don't want to. We don't want the temperature to fall below a certain point. So we have engineering, when it's applied to biology, is just starting to happen. This is exciting to me because these disciplines were very segmented before, and they didn't really borrow and understand what was going on with the engineering is coming into biology now. And in biology, this concept of feedback control is called teleology. Teleology just means it has a goal. We have a goal in mind. Darwinism reflects, actually came about because he wanted to show, and we'll talk about this next month, that there is no teleology in nature. There's teleology all over the place, goal setting. Anyway, so that, because teleology is not a product of materialism, there's no way your heating and air conditioning system came together without being engineered for it and constructed for it. And there's no way that it would operate without a goal to set the thermostat and so forth. So we get that kind of control within the cell. And the cell is just like a little mountain cabin. Every cell has a membrane, has some fluid inside, which is mostly water, so all those little organelles can float around and do their things. And when they manufacture the pieces that are necessary to replace your, I saw another piece falling off.
How embarrassing.
It's automatically being generated though. And inside that cell, it's manufactured and then shipped over to this station and shipped over to that station, and the chemical treatment is done and all that kind of stuff. That's all inside of this cell. Now, if you didn't have this control system, that equilibrium would find itself being the same as the outside.
The environment.
Imagine the space capsule. Remember Apollo 13 when it was coming back? Can you imagine? I mean, if one hole, how about the Boeing? You know, if that door blew off and so forth, and he didn't, that whole inside would have found equilibrium with the outside. Everybody would have died,
yes. Right?
But he knew how to control it and get it back into control. Well, the cell has this built-in equilibrium. I'm introducing some big words here, but these are the words of science, and they're important words. Homeostasis means that you are in your system is being controlled so that it stays alive, and that staying alive requires information, purpose, design, engineering, all those things that don't come about through materialism.
So I didn't even plan on asking about this, but you've actually introduced a whole nother realm of evidence.
Yeah.
You talked about evidence from the information that we find. You talk about the evidence from the engineering that we find. But now you're talking about this idea of, well, you mentioned teleology, which is a fancy word of saying purpose.
Yes.
Right? There's a purpose for something. That seems to me is a very convincing line of evidence for an intelligence. Because I can't think of something that's not alive, not intelligent, that would have some kind of a purpose baked into it. Where would that purpose even come from? A law has a lawgiver. Purpose has a purpose giver.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about Richard Dawkins' book in the 80s that talked about the selfish gene. How can a gene be selfish? I mean, how can something that's dead and doesn't have a mind,
Doesn't have an intelligence at all.
Intelligence, have purpose.
Yeah.
So, and we'll talk about that next month. That Darwin actually set out to show that nature could do this without any kind of purpose.
Yeah. And you've also mentioned on the website, again, plug in the website, please go. There's all sorts of good stuff there. But you have mentioned about how the Greeks used to think that you had to answer 4 questions before you could understand anything.
That's a good one. I always like to bring that up because the Greeks gave us our original way of thinking in a rational, methodological way. Of you had to, in order to understand anything, you had to know not only what it was made of and how it operates, which is materialism, but you also had to know what its design was and its purpose.
Not the design and purpose.
And so they said, Socrates said, if we don't know the answers to those 4 questions, we don't know what it is. So we shouldn't neglect design and purpose from our scientific explanations.
Absolutely, but today's science seems to be looking at what it's made of and how it works, which that's what it's good at. But that's only 2 of the 4 questions. And in order to really understand something, you need to be able to answer all 4. And I think you said the other 2 are how it was designed, like its design, and what its teleology is, or what its purpose is. Is that right?
I'll call it design and purpose. Right?
Design and purpose.
And that's what the new science of intelligent design is bringing to the table now. It wants to bring those back from Plato. Remember the diagram? Plato was pointing up and said design and purpose, and Aristotle was pointing down and said material and how it operates. Well, you need all 4. You need the top-down view of things, and you need the bottom-up view.
Yeah. You're hitting on all sorts of things. I did want to ask this question because it was kind of an aha moment for me when I realized that there is a difference between science and ideology. A big difference. And it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but science is or should be experimentation, theories, evidence, what works, what doesn't work, and then science should be open-minded to follow the evidence wherever it leads.
I'm with you.
Okay.
That's what we did at Socrates.
Okay. Right. Ideology, on the other hand, seems to start at its conclusion and make a decision about what you think is true, and it can be you can ignore, and we talked about this before, you can ignore any evidence that's contrary to what you're trying to prove. So science and ideology really are two different ways, 2 paths, but it seems to me that if the science has experimentation and you're looking at evidence, the best way to accomplish finding out truth is to follow the evidence wherever it leads with an open mind. It seems the Academy maybe hasn't done that in some of these situations.
Well, absolutely. Here's the problem. I'm going to give, I really appreciated Dr. Lillington from Harvard when he wrote a book review, wrote this in a book review. And he says that science doesn't compel us to accept material explanations only, but that's what they deal with now. Empirical evidence, right? That you can, hard evidence that you can put on a laboratory bench and you can test, and that's called empirical evidence, right? But there's all kinds of evidence. There's immaterial evidence too. That's what we talked about.
That's what we talked about.
We just talked about that. So he says that science, it's not that science compels us, because science is open-minded. I mean, science is just like you're saying, evidence, weigh the evidence. Does it point this way? Does it point that way? And that's what we try to do in Socrates. But he says that we are forced by our prior adherence to material causes. Wow. I mean, he was honest. He said, I have a prior adherence that there's only going to be material causes. Well, if there's only going to be material causes, then you can't even bring evidence for the kind of things we're talking about to the table. And if you can't get to the table, how can you answer our basic question, has science revealed or rediscovered a creator? So that's why we took this question on, because we said, let's take the blinders off for materialism and let's just say where all the evidence points, and that's what we're doing. So he's saying that materialism is not only what we do, but it's absolute. That's scary, right? That's called dogmatism. And we can have dogmatism in religion, we can have dogmatism in science, we can have dogmatism in politics. Most of us do at some time, at some point. We have dogma. If we're not open to the other side, then we're not going to see everything. And science, it's a search for truth. Science should be a search for truth.
Absolutely.
What's the true mean? Well, then you can't just say, I'm going to keep this kind of evidence off because I don't like it. I don't like the conclusion of it. One of the reasons intelligent design gets a bad rap in empirical science is the first thing they say, well, all right, so there's a creator. So who is the creator? Who's the designer? It doesn't know. I mean, science is agnostic to that. Now, as a Christian, you would say, oh yeah, well, it's God, obviously, or even just as an open-minded person that believes in a creator. It's not a religious conclusion. You can't come to a conclusion if there's a God or no God, but you can come to a conclusion of whether or not something's been designed.
Yes, and it's been actually pretty exciting because in the last session we talked about the parameters that have been finely tuned in the universe, and today we're talking about the origin of life. And I was very surprised to learn that both of those topics have been greatly enhanced by scientific evidence and investigation over the last 60 or 70 years. Mm-hmm. Prior to the 1950s and 1960s, we didn't know a lot of this stuff. And so it's almost as if science, as we progress, because we need to continue to progress in science, in our scientific knowledge, but it's prior to the 1950s, it really was disconfirming perhaps an intelligence, but then we got into the nitty-gritty on information, on the engineering in a cell, on the fine-tuning of the universe, and suddenly, isn't it true that science seems to be pointing towards some kind of an intelligence?
A couple of our sessions, we talked about 1966 when Time magazine ran its spread, God is Dead. Mm-hmm. And
quite a
evolutionary biology at that point in time had it wired. We knew everything about it. And then 1970 comes and boom, we get the molecular biology. We get the understanding of the structure of DNA. We get the signature of the cell. We get the Cambrian explosion. And you go on and on. And we get the fine-tuning arguments. Yes. And these are scientific arguments.
Right.
Scientific discoveries. These aren't people bringing their worldview to the table. These are the conclusions of scientific arguments. So yeah, it's been a complete reversal in the last 70 years.
Amazing.
Which was interesting because 52 was when the Miller-Urey experiment was there. And
52.
We were on our way. We were on our way to explaining building life in a laboratory, and the point all of a sudden, oh, excuse me, we're going the other direction.
Amazing. So it is the top of the hour, and we want to have some time for questions. That's sometimes the most exciting part of our sessions. I thought it would be good, however, for me to just summarize, I think, what we've learned today in 6 or 7 points that I have here. So, how's this sound? First, there is a history lesson of science, like we just talked about, that over the past 70 years that says that it's been confirming intelligent design, but there's been no experiment, no theory that's been able to explain how life could have arisen purely by natural causes. Right?
Correct.
That's what science is telling us. Okay. You gave us examples of how the prevailing view of the academy today really goes against what the science shows. And we talk about ideology. Dogmatism is kind of an ugly word, but you say, well, maybe it is even, they're being dogmatic about it. But just like Lewontin said, they are making a prior conviction towards a certain worldview before they look at the evidence. Okay. You then did give us actual evidence for an intelligence, for a creator. You talked about the information that was contained in each of our cells in the DNA and how unbelievably complex it is. And the amount of information in the DNA can stack in books up to the top of the Statue of Liberty. It's amazing. And of course, we only know of one cause where specified information comes from, and that is from an intelligence. You also talked about the engineering of the cell, and you showed us that wonderful picture about all these different structures and what you didn't get too much into it, but there are factories and there are waste treatment plants and there's transportation systems and all sorts of things all in the cell. And you argue that must have been engineered. Engineered structures have an engineer, have an intelligence behind it. And then, of course, we talked about, in contrast, science and ideology, and I just mentioned that. My last point here is it seems to me that we need to get science to be more open-minded. Right? So we're starting a movement, a scientific open-mindedness movement right here and right now in Saddlebrooke, Arizona. Yeah, and you were here. Well, good. Thank you. This is wonderful stuff, and I do appreciate all the time and effort that you went into building these arguments. Thank you, Stu.
Before we get into questions, I just want to say that we've been growing in attendance, and basically we grow in attendance by word of mouth. So if you are interested in this topic and you're interested in learning more and you have friends or neighbors that would be interested, please invite them. We would love to tell more people about this science. I'm going to open up the questions because I've got a two-part question here someone handed me in the back, and let me see if I can decipher it. Dr. Orr, you talked about 70 years of looking for the conditions that might generate life on its own, and we haven't found it in 70 years. If we're finding more and more planets out there, if we're finding that the universe is bigger than we ever thought, isn't it possible that even though we haven't found conditions for life as we know it on this planet, there could be different conditions on other planets for different type of life? That's question part one. The second part is, if in fact we don't have answers for that, aren't you just saying, well, God must have done it?
That's a good question, both of them. Here's what we do know from science. We do know that the same scientific laws that govern us here on Earth govern the planets out there, govern the sun, govern the edge of the universe. So there aren't different physical principles or laws anywhere that we know of. Could we discover something? Sure. Science is tentative. I mean, where we were 100 years ago compared to where we are today is amazingly different. And it will be amazingly different 100 years from now. But what you do in science is you take the best explanation, you make an inference to the best explanation of the evidence that you have now, and say it's pointing this way. Now, new information comes in that's going to point us some other way. That's perfectly fine. But we do follow the evidence wherever it leads now. So that's kind of part one. I don't expect to find a planet that has different scientific laws. That's why in our NASA experiments we look for, we know how, we need carbon, we need water, we need certain chemicals and so forth as we look for those chemicals there to make an inference that life as we know it would exist there. That's the best we can do, Dick, is say that the laws are the same, and until we have some further information. Could there be new information? Yes. How likely is it that there's going to be brand new laws discovered? Very unlikely. I mean, something's going to reverse gravity. That's called magic, all right? And I don't like to bring magic into scientific discussion. And the second part of it was, we just put God in, that's called the God of the gaps theory. You know, we say, well, it's negative that we know what didn't happen with materialism, so God did it. But I didn't make a God of the gaps argument here. I gave positive evidence for a mind, for a design. That's not a negative argument. That's a positive argument for a mind. So, and I don't know if we said that there's a creator, and I didn't even mention God. I just said there's a creator. Carl Sagan has to believe in a creator. If the universe began, what began it? That's the creator. it's unknown to a Carl Sagan at this point in time, but that's a creator. So that's as far as I can go, that there's a creator, and whether you want to call it God, I would call it God on a personal basis, but I couldn't call it that on a scientific basis.
Any other comments or questions you have?
We need the microphone so we get it on the video.
When you speak, hold it close to your mouth.
Stu, isn't Richard Dawkins and his colleague getting desperate? Aren't they starting a new atheistic movement in which their creed is religion is dangerous? Religion causes violence and war. And the second is, let's replace religion with science and atheism. The third in their creed is, we don't need God. We don't need God to be good. Atheism can give us a system of ethics. Aren't they getting desperate? Aren't they becoming, in essence, terrorists? Atheistic terrorists?
Well, yeah, if we're going to cast aspersions at each side, it's going to blame the other side. But you're making a good point about atheism. They started, this group that you're talking about started back in around 2006 called the New Atheists. Well, there's nothing new about the atheists. They're just more militant about being anti-religious and seeing, going over the history of crusades and so forth. And I'm not going to defend that from a scientific standpoint. We can discuss that one over dinner. But one thing I will notice is there was 100 million people murdered in the 20th century in the name of atheism. So if you want to take a religious argument, I'll take the side of that organized religion is much more palatable type of ethical system than atheism of Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, so forth. But yeah, that's not what we really are investigating in this talk, but it's a great question, and I'd love to talk to you over dinner about it. Yeah.
Fair enough, thank you.
Other questions? Raise your hand if you have a question or a comment.
Comments too, please.
I said you've talked about a single cell and the complexity of the operation of the cell, and you really talked about the duplication of the cell. The cell must be capable of reproducing itself and also must be capable of specializing into many, many different forms. The human body, for example, starts out as one single cell and it differentiates into muscles and nerves and red blood cells, et cetera, all of which derive from that one single cell. So the cell is much more complex than its own single operation. It must form many different kinds of cells as well.
Could you hear that?
Why don't you take first crack at it?
This gentleman is just saying basically that it's marvelous that one single cell can become a host of different types of cells. In cell division, I assume he's talking about in the creation of life in the womb and whatever, that one single cell becomes a multitude of different types of cells with different type of purposes, functions, shapes, and all of that.
It blows your mind.
It's mind-blowing.
Yes, thank you. It blows your mind. Look at the fertilization of a single cell sometime. Look at a video of that, and it'll just absolutely blow your mind, because when the fertilization takes place, the zygote starts dividing. I mean, first of all, the fact that it even divides, it multiplies. What information is in there that even causes it to do that? And then it differentiates, like you're saying, that into 200 different kinds of cells. I mean, not only do we have the 100 trillion cells, but they're different kinds. I'm glad I have hand cell here and not up here. And I'm glad when this one dies that it's replenished at the right place at the right time. That's a signature right there of some kind of intelligence that's driving the program. To talk about it otherwise would be like talking about having a computer that programs itself. A computer doesn't program, a programmer programs the computer, right? An engineer designs the blueprint. It doesn't design itself. A genius like Shakespeare puts together Hamlet, not a bunch of Scrabble letters thrown out on the lawn. So you're right. Intelligence is all around us, and we don't take that into consideration.
Yeah.
In fact, the intelligent design science is kept off the table by the materialists. They don't want to hear it. The first thing they want to hear is, I want to figure out how this was done by a material process. Give me another grant. Basically, that's how the grants are written. And if you're an intelligent design proponent, it's really scary what happens. You're ridiculed. Great story of Gunter Beckley. Gunter, a paleontologist, he was the head of the National History Museum of Stuttgart, Germany, in 2009 when they were celebrating one of the centennial birthdays for Darwin. He was charged with putting together a display to attract people to the museum in 2009. So he had the scale of evidence there, and he had all the evidence for materialism on one side, and all the evidence for this new intelligent design movement on the other side. And his board said, Gunter, the press might come and interview you. You better know something that's in those books, because the other side isn't even read. The intelligent design isn't even read by the materialistic community. So he picked up Michael Behe's book, and he started reading. He said, that really makes sense to me. So he contacts Michael Behe. I won't go into the whole story, but today he's an intelligent design proponent. He's not a religionist. He just knows that this doesn't happen on its own. So thank you for bringing that up.
We have another question over here.
Well, a question first and then a comment. Is it true that most scientists now believe that in the Big Bang that the universe started and is expanding from here?
Yes, this is incredible. Here's the universe today, let's say. It's 13.8 billion light years out there, as far as we can see anyway. And there's evidence for that. That was, if you want to see that, in fact, this month, Dick, we're going to release, right, the video on that one. But if you wind the clock back to t equals 0, time equals 0, just imagine like a balloon going all the way back. Comes all the way back to the start. So all the things in the universe, like you're saying, everything, including all our atoms, even wherever this intelligence is, had to be in that dot at the time. That's what the science says. That's what the Big Bang says. And I'm not even making a proponent of, am I a Big Banger or not? That's not the point. This is what science says. And then I'm looking at what direction does it point, right? Well, that points to a creator, because it couldn't happen by itself.
Well, my comment is it easier to believe that nothing created everything, or something or someone created everything?
Well, sounds like you've answered that question for yourself. I know I've answered it for myself.
And it's not just
I don't know anything that comes out of nothing, do you? I don't know. It's like the self-replicating dollar making me a billionaire.
It's not just a scientific question either, it's a philosophical question. And philosophy is another way to truth, and it's very complementary to science. Philosophy says you must have a first cause. You cannot go back infinitely with cause after cause. There has to be a first cause back there somewhere, and that complements very nicely what the science says about the Big Bang.
That's one thing we do at Socrates, is we look at science, we look at philosophy, we look at theology, and history, and testimony, and so forth, and put them together to say which direction does it point.
Bill Bryson, I just finished his book, A Short History of Everything. He alluded also to that Museum of Natural History in New York City. Paleontologists were discussing how to make this a visible thing for people coming through, and they admitted at the end, we made Lucy and that whole diorama more human than it should have been. The fossil record is another way of trying to get to the origins. And in that book also, basically, the conclusions were that the fossil record is fragmented and fractured at best, because a lot of the paleontologists want to be known and get a grant, want to be published for all their knowledge, and they admit we make conclusions with fragmented, fractured evidence. So that's the paleontologist. You get to the cosmos, we're learning things that are just astounding. You get to genetics, and it's a mystery to even the genealogists studying. The one thing they said they can get along with in agreement is 75% agree that mankind came out of Africa, that he was black, and he came in multiple migrations. And of course, we know the Earth was more together, so they didn't have to sail across the Pacific at that time. But there's just so many other disciplines in science that point to a creator. And for me, and my question to you is, it seems it requires not intelligence, but a humble heart. The ego edging God out is so strong in so many people. It is so sad.
No, thank you for your comment. Isn't that come with age too? I mean, I find myself a lot more humble than I was when I was 30. And that is one of the nice things about age. You realize, and that's what Socrates said. He said, the only thing I really know is that I know nothing. That's the only thing he really knew. And it's a wonderful attitude, isn't it, to have discussions with people. I love to have discussions with people who don't believe like I do about how do you interpret the facts that are on the table. But let's get all the facts on the table, right? At first, like with Dr. Beckley, he read this, The Other Side, and started becoming said there has to be some kind of intelligence in this, but his board said, no, you have to be a strict materialist, to be the curator of this museum, and literally fired him. I mean, he was forced out. And that's what happens to a lot of people that are looking at this material objectively, as they're eased out or kicked out, or actually, if you went home right now and you were to look up Gunter Beckley, you wouldn't even find his name in the Wikipedia. They have, if you use Wikipedia, be very careful. There's thousands of editors out there trolling for making sure that you're politically correct in what you say. What I'm saying today is not politically correct in science, but I have nothing to lose. I don't have a job, I don't need tenure, I don't need another grant. But they removed his page. This guy is the top of paleontologists. Dr. Jim Torr is another one. He's a Rice University professor. He's one of the top, most influential scientists in the world. He was voted in 2015 to be one of the top 25 scientists. What his specialty is in organic chemistry, synthetic chemistry. He puts molecules together. He knows how to build little machines out of molecules because he understands the chemistry, how this chemistry comes together. Well, a couple of years ago, he was looking at what the Origin of Life research community is saying about these building blocks coming together on their own. And he calls up his friends, some of which are Nobel Prize winners, and he says, I don't understand this. The chemistry doesn't work. I mean, these molecules can't come together. They don't even fit the way that these papers are saying that they come together. And his friends say, you know, we don't know either. We don't know either, but we're not going to, we don't tell anybody. We'll tell them over a beer. Yeah, we'll talk about that over a beer. But why? Because you're going to be out of tune. The political correctness of the Scientific Materialistic Academy, National Association of Science Teachers Association. You said anything like this, you'd be blackballed as a teacher. If your school district, the Dover, Pennsylvania school district, wanted to have one page in the library that talked about what intelligent design is, and one group of parents got a hold of that and presented it to the other side, and right away there's a lawsuit. We are indoctrinated in materialism. And the only way I know how to get the word out on that, because I think that's bad for science. I think it's bad for science too, because, and we'll go into that, but the only way to get the word out is in grassroots type of discussions like this. And thank you for your comment. It's very insightful. We're going to talk about Darwin next month, and what happens with paleontology and the fossil record, and did we come from apes, and you know, all those fun things.
We have one more. We have time for one more question.
You mentioned fossils. I'm now officially on my way to my mid-80s, so I guess I'm part of that. But I want to just bring one point up. I've taught apologetics for a long time and so forth, and I don't really have a stake in all this. But I wanted to bring forth one thought. And it revolves about thanking all you people who came here, because in my book and the experience I have had in a lot of different fields, including science fields, the truth is very important. If you don't understand anything, the truth is important. You may argue what that truth is and so forth, but truth is important. And yes, there are tests that you can do to determine whether things are true or not. I won't go through that. That's another whole chapter of itself. But the truth is important. When people say you might have a problem if you step out in front of a moving bus, the truth of that, it might just be important. Don't try it. And so as we look at evidence of things and we test it, it's very important, regardless of whether you're going to get blackballed if you speak the truth or not. Truth always wins. In the end, it always wins. It may take time, there may be scars, but it will win. And so I just encourage everyone here, you may be struggling with all the data, you may be struggling internally, thinking, wait a minute, because changing our minds is not the easiest thing in the world. We've been too indoctrinated for too many years in certain areas. Some that indoctrination has been good and it's been true, but not all of it is. You can't jump all the way from one ditch to the other. That wouldn't be honoring truth either. So I just want to say, the truth is important. It's very, very, very important.
But let me second that too, Gene. That's a really good point, because science is the pursuit, or should be, the pursuit of truth, right?
Exactly.
Regardless of where it leads.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for coming.